You're listening to the Talking Headways podcast network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week, we're listening in on a one-to-one conversation between City of Phoenix planner Elias Valencia and community champion Victor Vidales. They talk about the process of creating the South Central TOD community plan and what it takes to empower neighborhoods and reduce displacement. Stay with us. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Railvolution. For a deeper dive on livability issues or more information about the annual conference live in Miami, go to railvolution.org. That's railvolution.org. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous Patreon supporters. Thanks for supporting each month. We really appreciate it. To join this merry band of zoning nerds and infrastructure wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. The lightweight bike-only scarves have arrived, so you can choose between those or our bus-only scarves when signing up on Patreon. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. You can also now pre-order our winter heavy knit bus or bike-only scarves at theoverheadwire.com or order one of the lightweight summer bike-only scarves for immediate delivery. Order now at theoverheadwire.com. Also, because we do a lot of episodes covering a lot of books, we've partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire shop on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. Now, we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on the show and help keep us interviewing them, that would be tremendous. All the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. That's bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And finally, check out the Overhead Wire Daily Newsletter, established in 2006. We were doing it way before anyone else thought it was cool. Join thousands of readers and sign up for a 2-week trial at theoverheadwire.com to check it out. That's a 2-week free trial at theoverheadwire.com.
All right, Victor. So thanks for meeting up today. I know it's been quite a busy day, not just day, but quite a busy few years, right? We're here getting able to sit down and talk about the South Central TOD community plan. I'd like to take any opportunity we can to chat about that, especially with our stakeholders and with you. But just for everybody here, my name is Elias Valencia. I'm a transit-oriented development planner with the City of Phoenix's long-range planning team. And we're here today with Victor Vidales to talk about South Central TOD corridor and the community plan, which was approved by the City Council in March of this year, 2022. Victor, you care to do a little introduction?
Yes, Elias, thank you for having me. And my name is Victor Vidales. I'm a longtime resident and local property owner here in the South Central Phoenix corridor. I actually was born and raised in this neighborhood. My parish is St. Catherine of Siena, which is right on Central Avenue. So I've known these streets ever since I was a very young boy. I've seen it transition from a very agricultural area into a more urban area, and now even focused on a vision of even becoming more urban than before. But my wife and I, we reside here in the neighborhood. We started a business here on South Central about almost 18 years ago. We've raised our 5 children here in the neighborhood, and this is our place. This is our home. This is our barrio. This is where we live and will continue to call home for generations to come.
Well, Victor, you basically hit it right there where you said, live, work, play, and pray.
Right.
In the South Central corridor, right?
Right.
And those are all the makings of what make home. All well-rounded. You have all of those support mechanisms there and that community that keeps you wanting to live there and thrive in here. And especially the multi-generation that you're raising up here as a South Central Phoenix resident and with your brood coming up there. So before we get into South Central and the TOD plan, I mean, did you ever see yourself being involved with this project?
I did see myself, Elias, being involved in this project because I've been very active in the community for decades. When I came back from the U.S. Army, I was gone for about 5 years. I had to leave South Central for a lot of issues that occurred in our neighborhood, including some gangs, some violence, and some issues with family, including the loss of my mom and my sister. So, coming back to South Central after 5 years of being away, I really made an effort to get involved in the neighborhood because I felt like nothing had changed. And, when you're young and a quarter of your life has passed and you don't see any progress and improvement of the neighborhood or some of the situations, it really called for me to get involved. And so, being involved in this TOD process really started with that neighborhood involvement, but I think really got sharpened when we started organizing around the light rail. Light rail was going to come to our community, and we knew that we would either be in the way and it would just run over us, or we could actually be a part of the process and influence what that light rail would look like. And I think we've made a pretty significant imprint on what the South Central Light Rail extension looks like. So it made it a natural fit for us to jump in from the design and planning elements of the light rail, from all the way back to the environmental assessment, leading all the way to the 30, 60, 90% design, and then understanding that what's next and how can we influence that so that the community had a voice and what their neighborhood actually looks like without the displacement and gentrification that we've seen happen all across the country, where light rail has actually come into neighborhoods like ours.
Not to take away too much from where you're heading there with the light rail, I know we're going to have plenty to talk about regarding that and our triumphs and trials with that. You said some really good stuff there about leaving home for about 5 years and coming back and noticing. In essence, it sounded like, you made improvements on yourself. You got back and you noticed that your community wasn't improving. And that was part of that initial spark there. So almost like the drive to get that positive change.
You grew up in a neighborhood that really was just torn apart by gang violence and other issues related to poverty. It does change your perspective on things and on life. And so going into a small town of Morenci, where my family was been for 4 generations, and then going to the U.S. Army and traveling all over the country and meeting other people that primarily were from low-income communities really did form me in a different way. And so when I came back home, I was completely different. And I felt fortunate, but I also felt obligated because I had this benefit that I should carve a pathway for other youth and other people in our community. And so I did that early on, organizing community cleanups, doing mentoring with kids that were also in families that were tied to gangs or their parents were in prison, or there was substance abuse in the house. A lot of things that were really just plaguing our neighborhoods back when I was a kid was still there when I came back. So it was really helpful for me to be able to help other youth in the neighborhood who actually wanted to break that same cycle of poverty and those same cycles of issues that were occurring in their home and in their neighborhood. Yeah, it was very, really purposeful work for me to come in and be tied to my neighborhood in that way.
Well, you've definitely been a mentor for your community. And I can even tell you, working with you as a planner here, I've also been mentored by some of the talks that we've had, and from your viewpoints and your experiences. I can't forget the day that you put me to work there at the car wash. And it's I have worked quite hard in my life too, Victor. I share a similar background in that I come from a low-income family, minority. My family immigrated into America, and I was born here in the U.S. And so I've had a lot of privileges that I take for granted in one aspect, given their background. But then growing up, I would look at some of the areas that we were in. It's like, why does our area look different than these other areas? Why don't we have sidewalks? Why are there no lights? Why are there animals hit on the street every day? And we could be one of those animals one of these days if these cars keep getting close. Come to find out, that's what happens when you live in a disinvested area. I didn't know about city planning at that time, but that was kind of what was shaping me to get involved as a city planner.
So what did get you into becoming a city planner? And was there some moment from your childhood that you saw, whether it was at school or something that you wanted to get involved in forming your city or what you thought a city could be?
So when it clicked was it didn't click in school because I was originally going for philosophy, and then I got even more lost than I felt at that point. But it was those things that I would see my mother working, and we were living in a house. It was probably 6 of us in the house, and I was just seeing her struggles and wondering why does this feel like a third world country where we're living at? And I wanted to do something to help. And so I knew finishing school was one thing I had to do because, my mother believed in me there. And I know she believed in me more than I did myself. And eventually, I started believing in myself as well. But seeing that and learning about land use and that things shape and happen because of these actions that are above just the neighborhood level. These are like at the city level, at the federal level. That's what got me into city planning. I wanted to say, well, not only can I help change my mother's neighborhood, I could try to make a better impact in the world. And it started that way. It started that way. Then you get into the bureaucracy, and you're just approving plans and stamping on fences. And then thankfully, this opportunity came up in Phoenix to be part of the South Central TOD community plan, and said, this is what I remember learning about in school and the types of changes that could happen. And I wanted to be a part of that. So that's how I got involved here.
Well, yeah, that I think that, seeing the way you handled shepherding this plan through the many obstacles, you could tell there was something more there driving you. So it was something unique to see in a city planner, to really connect with the community the way you did. And so we appreciate that, in the South Central Corridor, that you made such strong efforts to connect to the people and really put people first. And I think that's really what resonated with our community, is that, when you have interactions with the city over decades, sometimes we've seen it where we're all very reluctant to participate in the public process. And I can say you really made it easy to connect with you and to trust you and trust what you were doing through this process of creating a plan that I think is something that I've never seen before. Being involved with so many different planning efforts, going back decades, I really feel like this plan, what we see is that it has more fingerprints of people from the community than I've ever seen in any planning process. And I think that's important. And I don't want to jump too far ahead. I know we're going to get into this, but I just wanted to share that with you, Elias, and on your, desire to change things and us, how it really connected with us to also have and desire that same change for our neighborhood.
I'm going to say that this experience was a very humbling one for me at certain points, and having strong community champions and such as yourself and many others, such as our steering committee and our SOFO convening and the South Central Collaborative. And we'll talk about all of them folks in a little bit as well. But thanks for that acknowledgement, Victor. And I also want to give you kudos, because taking it to the forefront there and being a champion and on a volunteer basis too, you're not compensated for that work. It takes a lot of heart and a lot of love for the community to be able to do that. And that's what makes these and drives these types of plans, and why I continue to say that it's been a privilege to be able to work with you on this. Now, we have been trying to, talk about the benefits of light rail and the TOD, transit-oriented development, and walkable urban code for South Phoenix. But South Phoenix is a world-class corridor on its own, right? Victor, you've been mentioning that and stating that in several of your conversations with community stakeholders and elected officials. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes the South Central Corridor that world-class corridor?
Well, I think it really came from visiting other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And so when I refer to South Phoenix becoming a world-class community, or South Central becoming that world-class destination, it really stems from visiting places all across the country, like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Seattle, getting to travel outside of the country in Mexico, in London, in Birmingham, in the United Kingdom, in Vancouver, in Ottawa, and Ontario, Toronto, all the cities in Canada. You start to see these major metropolitans really just function differently than we have here in the city of Phoenix. And when you become the 5th largest city in the country, and you still see that the way the city's operating is not in line with those other world-class cities, I think it's important to put that desire into the public realm, into the public square, to say, why not us? Just like you talked about with your mom's neighborhood and some of those other desires, why can't we be like London? Why can't we be like, these other great cities? We can, and we just have to be purposeful about it. We have to make these long-term commitments. And I haven't been paid to do this work in the community, but I have been paid in different ways, knowing that I've advanced some of the initiatives that is going to set the foundation to really hold up this community that has been overlooked for decades. When you come from a low-income community, there's actually a lot of beauty that comes from being resilient and living in poverty and the community that it can create. I really believe we have a very special thing in South Phoenix, and that culture, that perseverance of going through all the ills of poverty and all the challenges of a place that wasn't necessarily well planned or designed for large human habitation really makes a special people. And so I think we have a foundation of people that really can make this place something unlike anybody else has ever experienced in the world. People come to Arizona for renewal. They come to Arizona for this, the Phoenix, right? The whole story about the Phoenix, coming from the ashes. And I feel like South Central exemplifies that. We've been burnt to the ground and we're rising up, and we want the whole world to see, the beauty of our people, the beauty of our mountain, the beauty of our river, the beauty of our city. We want to show the world that. And so that's what I mean by a world-class destination, where just like you would want to visit any of those other great cities, South Phoenix becomes one of those destinations that you want to experience in your life.
And Victor, you touched on all of those geographic resources that are here in the corridor for South Central. There are some states that can't offer you the variety that you see in this. It's just for everybody listening, the South Central TOD corridor is about a 5.1 mile stretch. It stretches south of the railroad tracks, the Union Pacific tracks there, just south of downtown. And it goes down to South Mountain Avenue between the 7th. So that's 7th Avenue and 7th Street. So you got about a 5.1 square mile area. And in that stretch, Victor, you got the mountains, the river, downtown, and you got, place is one thing, but what makes place is people. And you brought that up, the culture, the resiliency behind the families that have been living in the corridor through all these times in planning history. We got from inception of statehood, from the old farms that were here, then to the redlining practices where all of those uses were pushed down to the south,
right?
The landfills, the processing plants, all of that stuff just continued to build over time, and the heavy concentration of industrial uses. Yet, like you brought out, this is a world-class destination because of its location to all of the amenities. But it's not about connecting necessarily South Phoenix to the world, right? It's to connect the world to South Phoenix. Because anytime I come down here to visit, I feel like I'm at home. It feels like family. Feels like that place I've been missing out on. You don't get that in suburbia. Definitely not. And so I agree with you there on that world-class vision for the corridor. And not to sound too nerdy, though, I know we got to get some demographic specs here, but this is also very important because it's kind of what helps shape and guide our vision and the plan as a community and what we wanted to reach there. The South Central corridor is basically a community 50-50. 50% are renters and the other 50% are owners. But of those 50% that rent, 2/3 are at below the 60% average median income threshold.
Right.
Which basically, what does that mean to you, Victor?
Well, it shows the vulnerability that this community has when light rail is been positioned or framed as an economic development tool. we heard all the statistics, when voting for the light rail, wanting to bring it to South Central, was that, for every dollar spent in light rail, that there's a $8 return on investment. That's what we've seen here in the city of Phoenix. So when you think about that, it's nearly a $10 billion investment that's going to come into this corridor. And so there's definitely some concern there, because when 2/3 of the people in between the sevens in South Central live on less than $20,000 a year, and their ownership is very limited, they have the greatest risk. They're the most vulnerable to be removed. And we already are in the process of we're challenged right now with actually helping families to have that quality of life that they desire for them and for their families, because their income is so low. Things are so expensive in Phoenix right now and in South Phoenix that you could actually say it's already been gentrified, because of the cost to live here is just gotten so far out of hand that people have to live on the fringes now if they want to move, if their lease is not renewed or their trailer is taken away for not making a payment on it. It really does not give them the ability to stay here very long. So yeah, that's our big concern. And that's part of why the SOFO convening and South Central Collaborative came together to say, what are some of the things that we can work on, some strategies to minimize displacement and gentrification, because that's something that is real, and people in this community are going to be impacted if we don't do something to work with the city and the public and private environment to stakeholders to try to help these families.
So speaking of those challenges, Victor, resiliency was one of the presentations we gave about resiliency post-pandemic, where we start talking about the bounce back and the adaptability, how all those factors come into play. But yet the biggest factor is going to be love, the love that the community has for one another. And that's part of the reason that vision, that statement came across, to reject displacement and to share prosperity with the existing residents and those future residents that may choose to live in the corridor as well.
Right.
You brought up tons of challenges there right now. The current market condition is not helping at all whatsoever with those rental rates and housing ownership, housing attainability.
Right.
And then when we were going through this process, the pandemic hit as well. At that point, we were pretty much at a point where we could continue to work on the plan internally and get those interdisciplinary departments to look at it. Thankfully, we had the opportunity to do all of that wonderful outreach before the pandemic hit full force. But even before that, those were these demographics here show that living on the fringe is not safe, is not comfortable, knowing that the neighborhood you call home could no longer be yours due to somebody selling and redeveloping a site, or just due to jobs and many challenges are there right now too. Have you seen any assistance with federal programs that are coming in there to help those that are in the corridor, anything like that?
Not enough. So, of course, we all saw what the federal government did for COVID and offering stimulus checks and credits and other support for small business with the PPP programs. There was a lot there that came out to support those that were vulnerable because of the pandemic, but not enough. And what you said is exactly right. We have literally thousands of residents that can be displaced by one owner. So even though they may own their trailer, those neighborhoods that have been a long time landing place for so many, especially our immigrant population or our first generation Americans, are at risk. And so there are real challenges that we have where, I don't say we have all the solutions yet, but it really helps to have, I think, forums like this where other cities, are dealing with this across the country. And I really believe that South Phoenix, South Central has an opportunity to really model what this country is all about. Self-determination and how people can choose to do great things starting at home and starting in their neighborhood and starting into the broader community. And I really believe with what this South Central plan has done is it's captured those aspirations, those dreams, those visions that people have for their own community. And now we have to align the policies and the capital and all the other tools and resources that we need to really help this community live out what they've dreamt, what they visioned for their life. And it doesn't help that, a lot of this community was set back generationally with some of the redlining practices. We've learned that communities and neighborhoods have been redlined or they've been impacted. They never got to participate in that equity growth or that growth of wealth in their neighborhood or in their families because there was no investment coming into their neighborhoods. There was no investment coming into their community. There was no ability to create ownership for themselves. So these are challenges that I know don't just exist in South Central, but all over the country. So if we can really come together with love, with patience, with the ability to empower those who live here to start that progress of breaking those cycles of poverty. There's a human development side to this corridor that has to happen along with the physical and the built environment. And those are challenges that I don't know all the answers to, but I think there's enough people in the city and in this country that could figure some solutions. And that's what we're hoping we can do and accomplish here.
So, Victor, what do you think then about, I know you had original thoughts, and what are your thoughts with the light rail and transit-oriented development for the South Central Corridor? Do you think that it's appropriate? And what can that help signify for these members of the community and for yourself as a property owner?
Yeah, I do believe there's a benefit here, although it's painful to transition from a car-dependent or car-oriented community to a transit-oriented one. And we've seen that by businesses in our corridor who have closed their doors because they were dependent on the vehicle. And now that the traffic patterns have been disrupted because of construction of this 5-mile extension all at one time, there's been some real challenges there. But if we can make it to the other side and we can help those small businesses and residents to stay in place and participate in the actual operation of this light rail, I believe there's many benefits that the city and that this part of our city is going to be able to benefit from. The access to education, higher education, better quality education, access to healthcare and healthcare facilities. We don't have a hospital in South Central. We have to travel outside the corridor, access to jobs and higher paying jobs. The need to have a vehicle might disappear over time, knowing that they're going to have a reliable source of transportation that they can depend on to get to work, to get to school, to get to their healthcare. So there are definitely a lot of benefits that the light rail is going to bring to us. And then it gives the ability for this city to really look at how they develop around the corridor, around the light rail. So the densities and all of the opportunities for creating affordable housing, to create affordable retail space, to create affordable office space for your entrepreneurs and for those that are in the community. It could really be something special if planned right and if done right. And I think the people in this community have shown that they want it. We had to vote for it 3 different times. Yeah. And the last vote, well over 70% of the community said, we want this in our neighborhood. We want this in the community, because we understand that even though it's going to be hurtful initially, there's going to be these long-term benefits. And we see that, again, going to the world-class city, you go to places like Washington, D.C. or New York or London, and you see their transportation systems and the mixed incomes that exist around those systems they're amazing. And they really create these vibrant places to live, work, play, and pray, as you said.
It's tough to see that vibrancy right now through the construction traffic. You bring up a good point there, Victor. And I'm thinking back now, and part of that construction work also included replacing that old infrastructure that was in place, right? Nearing almost 100 years. So in one sense, I'm a little torn because I've walked down those streets, and it is tough to traverse, and especially with the temporary fixes during construction. How do you walk on the asphalt there, especially for those that are mobile impaired? And then you look and you weigh the benefits also. What would happen if it got torn up again? You put the infrastructure in, then you tear it up again months later for the rail line. It's almost like the lesser of the two evils. But like you said, it's those growing pains. And I really do hope that as we continue to cooperate and coordinate there and collaborate with the contractor. And that leads me to ask you a couple other questions. You've been involved with a lot of groups that are maintaining and collaborating on what the plan has called out for and what the members of the community have chimed for, not only as part of the newest, one of the newest groups for the South Central Corridor, the so-called convening neighborhood group that you helped co-found there, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Then the South Central Collaborative, and you're also on the South Central Construction Advisory Board as well. Do you mind expanding on any of those three?
Yeah, I mean, they're all really connected because, again, going through the initial design of the light rail and being impacted, we decided to collaborate and work with our neighbors to the north, Central City South and the Warehouse District, to say that, hey, if we come together, we'll have a stronger voice in advocating for what we really believe this light rail should be and how it should serve us. It should be a connector and not a divider. And part of that, some of the initial wins that we received was, going through the planning process with the design team of AECOM and Valley Metro and the city of Phoenix. And before some of those groups were selected, the primes like Kiewit and AECOM, we were able to work with the city of Phoenix and Valley Metro in saying that there's this financial benefit that comes from investing in the light rail. And these multinational companies come in, and this is what they do. And they're very good at it. And we said, well, how could we benefit from that? And how could we create language in these RFPs to create a local benefit, a local preference in supporting workforce development? And some things that we did was create a workforce development program in both the design and the construction contract. And I remember when we got that language to be approved by the city of Phoenix and Valley Metro, it was such a big win for the community. And then there was the artist piece that they decided to separate out of that. And, we were not going to allow that to just go to the national level. But we said, you know what, we want the same language that we put in the RFPs for the design and the construction contracts and the RFPs to also be in the artist selection process. And so we created the language. It got adopted by Valley Metro and the city of Phoenix. And we were able to select 10 of the 15 artists to be local artists. And that's $3 million of contracts that were able to stay local. And not only was it, wealth building, it also created new skill sets for artists that didn't necessarily have the experience to do public art. And so now these artists are going to have opportunities all across the country and all across the globe they now understand the process of public art and what it means to do that type of work. So yeah, those neighborhood groups and those community groups coming together, really having these conversations, start to find pathways to carve out opportunities for light rail to benefit people now during the process. And the same thing with the construction, getting workforce development so that we had a workforce that is not just transient anymore, where you're just pulling people from light rail projects from city to city to city, but actually empowering and educating people to have that skill set here locally so they can continue to build light rail throughout the city of Phoenix. So yeah, those were some of the victories that the South Central Collaborative was able to initiate and implement and benefiting the community.
Yeah, Victor, I think you and the collaborative members, you guys worked behind the scenes feverishly to help also draft these guidelines, design guidelines to consider for local developers, working on mentoring and empowering local developers as well, which I believe is one of the best ways, in my opinion, as a city planner. If you want to retain culture, if you want to minimize the ill effects of gentrification and reduce displacement, then what better way than to have local investment with local community interests in mind? Tell us a little bit there about the gentrification work group and the local developer designs and some of the things and projects that you guys are working with on that.
Right. So we had this opportunity, to right out the gate before the plan was actually approved, having a mission-based developer, a local nonprofit, developing a very prominent corner in the corridor. And because we were educated through all the statistics, through all the research, through the TOD grant that came to our neighborhood, and hearing what, all the different voices from the neighborhood, what they desired for their community, a lot of them wanted to stay in place. And this nonprofit came in and wanted to build workforce housing to target the 60 to 80% of median income. And right away, our neighborhood groups came together and said, hey, here's our design guidelines, but we also want you to consider that the majority of people in this community live at 30 to 50% of AMI. And so what can we do to work with you to achieve that, so that people that live in this neighborhood will have an opportunity to participate and live in this new beautiful community that you're going to develop? So they were very transparent with us and told us all their challenges from reaching that 30 to 50% of AMI. One was the lender that they, again, a national CDFI, who will remain anonymous at this point, gave them a very generous loan to acquire the land, but the interest rates were so high that it was almost a hard money loan. So that was one thing, driving up costs, and not only driving up costs, but it shrunk their timeline to push through the planning process, so that they didn't have the ability to work with us because they needed to retire. They needed to get to a certain timeline and accomplish certain things in their entitlements in order to retire that debt, so they could move on and get their construction line and really develop it. And then another thing that they shared with us, and you talked about it earlier, was the lack of infrastructure in our community. So the offsite improvements that the city was going to require them to do was about $1.5 million of offsite improvements. And so all these different things were hitting this developer that was, a nonprofit, a mission-based developer, and they're not able to reach those that are most vulnerable in our community to actually live in the neighborhood that they're developing. So that we did oppose that development. And I would like to say that, we were somewhat victorious, because initially they only committed to 9 units of 30 to 50% of AMI. And we just recently got a presentation where they added 32 units of 30 to 50% of AMI. And that doesn't seem like much of a victory, but for us it was, because that's 30% of those units are now going to be made for people that actually live and work in this community, and they can participate in the development of their neighborhood and improve their quality of life. But those are the type of challenges that as a neighborhood, we started to say, we can't continue to spend all this energy fighting developers. We have to build some skill sets ourselves and look at how do we become neighborhood developers and develop some of those housing typologies that might be the solution for this neighborhood, and say, it can be done. Maybe not at your scale, but at the neighborhood scale and at a neighborhood development scale, we might be able to create solutions for our neighborhood, for our neighbors, people that sit in the pews with us, people that shop with us, people that work with us in our neighborhoods. We can actually provide those solutions for them. And so we're working on those plans as a group with the collaborative, the South Central Collaborative and social convening, on developing the future developers of our communities that want to take these initiatives on and build that skill set for themselves and build wealth for people in our community as well as themselves.
If only there was a community plan somewhere that could help guide and lead the way, right?
Right.
No, so that's circling back to the South Central TOD community plan. the South Central Corridor is not the first transit-oriented development corridor in the city of Phoenix.
Right.
However, I agree with you totally that this is the first corridor that is being done in a different way than, especially from the existing ones there. Not to badmouth or anything on those processes, because they were all wonderful. They all led to a great use of high capacity transit growing and expanding in the city. Had they not been successful, we probably wouldn't have a South Central Corridor to have even been considered, as unfortunate as that sounds. Thankfully, we had federal funding to help with the planning efforts, and those planning efforts, again, started in 2008. Sounds not too long ago, right? Anything after 2000 to me sounds like it was just 5 years ago. But that's, I guess when you grow up in high school around that area, dating myself here, but it always feels like yesterday. But that's 2008 to 22. I can't do math that quick. 14 years? 14 years, almost 15 years. That's when the light rail came to Phoenix.
Right.
Now think about that in the scope of the city's history. That's like yesterday.
Right.
And everything before that was all cars.
Right.
So we got that 2008 light rail actually came in with, before there was even a community plan for it. Really, there was a TOD strategic policy framework to try to help shape and guide, knowing and realizing that light rail development may need to be different because it's a different type of transit model. And hey, you mentioned something earlier today in our discussion that we had prior to this about a density cap and how to make it so that it can be sustainable instead of subsidized. So that TOD policy framework was there. Then Reinvent Phoenix came in 2011 for the 5 transit-oriented development areas that are existing. And then we fast forward to 2016 when the federal funding, the grant started going through, and the planning efforts. I didn't come on board until mid-2018.
Right.
So you gave a good summary there about your involvement with the efforts where even before we had even received the planning grant to even do a community plan. And that was critical because you were able to do some of those design components, local artists, local labor force, and skill enhancement empowering, giving them the opportunities to branch out career-wise also, all from within the corridor. If that doesn't show that there's acceptance of the community, as long as they are part of that process, I don't know what does.
Right.
I think that was the key component, that they needed to be a part of this process. And so going back to the community plan, being part of this process, how do you think that outreach efforts were? I know Petra Falcon with Promise Arizona was involved. I have some stats here that we can get into, but what were your initial takeaways and thoughts? I think you were in some of the road shows as well.
Yeah, I thought that, one, that was a process in itself, because you had a not your normal planning group become a prime on a TOD grant to really drive this process. And Promise Arizona and Gould Evans coming together to become the co-primes on this, I thought was one of the most critical steps that the city allowed to happen beginning this process, because what they did is they went door to door. They actually went to the people, and they knocked on over 7,000 doors and had all these individual conversations and assessments. They had all these road shows and all these meetings in the community that, again, really started to inform the plan. That was special, because in all the years of, I've been involved in the planning process since early 2000, when we first did Rio Salado Beyond the Banks. And back then there was in that plan, part of Transit 2000, the light rail coming to South Central. But back then, I think the incentives federally were a little perverse, because it was more about getting cars off the street as opposed to reaching communities that were already dependent on mass transportation. And so we lost that first opportunity to be part of that initial light rail construction, because more people in between the sevens or South Central were already using mass transportation, the bus, because we don't have light rail. But yeah, going and seeing that process, it's something that I never saw before, because it wasn't just a dozen or 24 community leaders that were met over months to inform a planning process with the city and their consultants and those who received the prime. But it was really a strong effort of community engagement that I think is unlike anything. I've never seen it. So it's really special in that way.
one thing that I noticed myself here was the amount of community involvement was intense. I've seen planning efforts before. I mean, I've been doing planning for about 15 years now, 6 of it here in Phoenix. And in my time here in Phoenix, I had not seen an effort like this in my time here. Hearing you say you haven't seen anything of that amount, and you've been here obviously your whole life, is amazing that I was able to be a part of that process. And I did see that. I did see the community engaged. It was English and Spanish. They had standalone Spanish workshops too, not just, combined with the translator.
Right.
They did them different times of the week. So not just on the weeknight, but also on a weekend. And they included, of course, everybody's favorite food and activities. Because, you want participation, you got to make it fun, right? So it was fun talking to the families there and getting them to participate in those activities just came natural there. The boards were out. Our consultant did a great job, I think, with the activities there, making them very colorful, engaging. They have a word cloud where everybody's contribution was designed into this artistic element, showing basically these like chrysanthemum type of things that are going out with people's concerns and thoughts. That amount of attention to detail, I think, was very imperative in the plan coming together. While you guys were there doing behind the scenes work with your workshops and groups and the consultant, I had to be the liaison with the South Central TOD steering committee.
Right.
Now, let me tell you a little bit about that, Victor.
Yes.
I think you originally were recommended to be one of those members, and I think you had then other interests, and then you got involved with these other groups. And I'll tell you, that group, it was an amazing group to work with, but it was also a different type of realm, right? I'm stuck there in the government sector. I don't get to be having all the fun with the public there, engaging in the activities on those conversations. These were the difficult conversations. These were like, where has the city been all these years? Things with racism and environmental justice. And when I talk about humbling, when I first got into this, I thought environmental justice was green systems and global warming. No, environmental justice has to do with those tough discussions.
Right.
Our committee at one point spent months having a repeat discussion on displacement and gentrification and criminalization and food access, all real social issues that have built part of the background and history here in the corridor, right? That lack of trust.
Right.
And when I started hearing that, I was like, I know why this is here, because I grew up in a neighborhood just like that, which is why I felt the way I did when I was at my mother's, which is why I take such personal pride in this project. There's trust here. And me working with the community, there's a level of trust there as well. And I can't let my friends and family down in the South Central corridor, which is why I am committed to this here. But those discussions from the committee members then also led to that vision that was captured here about rejecting displacement and sharing that prosperity and supporting walkable urban code and the transit-oriented development. What are your thoughts about that vision? Is that really reflective of what the community has chimed to you?
Yeah, I 100% believe that. The reason I chose not to be part of the TOD steering committee is, I actually spoke to your boss and telling him, there's some real-time things that need to be happening. We can't just wait and, not have these conversations, because there was a lot of restrictions with that committee from being involved and engaged because it violated, the public meeting laws and other things that I just didn't want to be constrained with. And I felt like I could still be a part of, I only missed, I believe, 2 meetings of the TOD meeting, but I was always there as a public participant and could speak freely, and not only in the meetings, but outside of the meetings. And I thought that was critical, because there was other things that we were able to work in parallel as the TOD planning was going about its way and working its way towards being approved. There were things that we were working on ourselves, like the design guidelines, talking to community members, talking to business owners, talking to residents, and saying, hey, this is what we want for our community. And we were introducing these things into the TOD planning committee, and it was embraced. We had these opportunities to present and to share our visions and ideas. and they were vetted out, and a lot of those things were made to be brought into the plan. And I think the most important part of this plan, from our perspective in the neighborhood, and from the collaborative and the SOFO convening, is it wasn't just about getting it approved. It wasn't just about capturing all the voices in the document. It was about how this leads to implementation. Without this plan being implementable, it was really going to be a waste of time and energy. So I now believe we have something of substance that we can implement. And, when you are engaged in community planning and organizing for so many years, there's this intellectual knowledge that you get to carry on because of all your experiences of working with different plans in the corridor. And to have this plan now that is so comprehensive in its approach, that it really gives us a tool to live out what it says, a corridor-wide vision, which is special. I know that we're pretty special when you talk to other neighborhoods that are along the light rail and say, hey, we want this. we want this process to happen. And as tedious and as difficult as it was, it really is something of beauty. And now it's our job to implement it.
Yeah, no, your background, you said you had a military background, that battlefield, right? This is basically a battlefield you've been primed for and prepped for, and sharing that wealth of knowledge with the youth, local developers as well, and those that happen to be in the position where they do own property. This plan as a guiding document is wonderful, and you said it wasn't about getting it approved, and thankfully it did get approved.
Right.
In fact, the steering committee did unanimously approve it. There was one, and the planning commission did as well. And then at the city council, there was a couple holdout but that still passed. One thing here is that I do want to bring light to was there was a discussion there because the plan used to be called the South Central Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Community Plan. And there was a discussion on that word equity. And even though the plan does do an excellent job of capturing what equity is and what it could be, that there's real work that needs to be done to become equitable. So in a unanimous move, the committee did say, let's remove equity from it because that's one of the things that we're going to be working for. And you said it, Victor, implementation. Implementation is key. What all of this would have been for naught if we don't implement it. And that leads me to this tough question here. As a non-regulatory document, what keeps you believing in this document? I have an answer for it, but what keeps you believing in the ability of this document?
It's the hope that when you have self-determination, and I know what it's like to break the cycle of poverty and to create opportunities for yourself. This is what makes America such a great place to live. In one generation, through education, through understanding, through wisdom and experience, I've broken the cycles of poverty. My wife and my 5 children are now able to live a much better life than I was given an opportunity as a youth. And so us owning this plan and us sharing with our policymakers, this is what the plan says, holding them accountable to all the things that are going to impact this neighborhood, to the individual projects that will come. It's up to us to own this and really live it out. And I think that's really the opportunity for us, is that we have something that has captured a pretty broad base of perspectives, and it's been brought together in a way that we can actually make this happen. It feels like it's something that's achievable because we were all part of that process. And I think that there's, you talk about equity. I remember when the Equitable Transportation-Oriented Development Fellowship came to town, I got to give them a tour of Between the Sevens. And when I gave them that tour, they had all these different interviews with community members, and they came up with this really beautiful policy document. It was with Policy Link. I can't remember the other institutions that were, I think Urban Land Institute was also part of it. That they really said, it can't just be a light rail project. It has to be a neighborhood improvement plan. And, when just there's certain things that you learn throughout the process that really start to empower you, like concurrent non-project activities. When you go through that whole light rail planning, and as a community member, you're like, okay, well, why isn't the city? Where are all my SINPAs? Where are all the concurrent non-project activities to support the light rail, to bring connectivity from all these neighborhoods that never received the infrastructure investment when they were annexed into the city 60 years ago? And so you see the inequities that exist. But again, learning the language, the finding of no significant impact, the Fonzies, that everyone tries to get in order to build a light rail project, all these things that we learn, it just continues to build. So that's what makes me so hopeful about this plan, is that it just has continued to take us to another level, education and understanding, not only what the city and some of the planners need to move this forward, but what the community needs to do in order to achieve these, and who they need to approach to make sure that those governmental entities or those stakeholders are going to live out the vision that they desire for their neighborhood and community.
Thanks, Victor. And yeah, as a non-regulatory document, this doesn't put a zoning overlay on anything. But one thing that is going to make this successful is the fact that it was written by the community for the community, right? So it's like a code of conduct, and it's easier to buy into that when you were part of the process.
Right.
And I strongly believe in that. This plan took a South Central approach to protect, enhance, and invest. Right. And they highlighted the areas and points of pride. So these maps speak volumes to me as a land use planner, and our decision makers, when they do have to hear cases, they can reference these maps, right? And these maps then can show the type of projects that are in alignment with what the community wanted. And one thing that I can see is that when you go from strategies to actions, that our money is where our mouth is, right? Or that we're hitting the shovel to the ground there on this plan. Just the following month after this plan was adopted, this was I think, what was it, in April? Just last month,
right.
or a couple of weeks after the TOD plan was adopted. The walkable urban code was then allowed over the transit-oriented corridors. So that was an amazing win on the land use front. It's opening up those flexible options to help share and build wealth in the community and bring those services, those needs and resources that the community is seeking and wanting and calling for in their plan, to be allowed to do those. So even though it's non-regulatory, that to me, this plan is a guiding force. And there's so many voices behind it that any decision maker that doesn't listen to the voices that show up for this is going to be, in a world of hurt there. So, Victor, before we close out today, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, or the South Central Collaborative, do you have any contact information for that? Any website that they should visit for more information?
Sure. So we are a true neighborhood group. So my individual email address is vvidales. That's VVIDALES 3@gmail.com. And, love to share with anyone that is part of learning more about how their community or neighborhood could get involved in a future infrastructure project like ours, or a future plan. I'm happy to share what we did to come together and have this influence. But thank you for giving me the time to share, and we look to our continued partnership with you and the city of Phoenix and all those that want to see this plan become a reality.
All right, don't go anywhere yet, Victor. I'm going to give you guys my contact information too, and then I have one last question for you. So I'm Elias Valencia with the City of Phoenix. If you wanted to learn more about the South Central TOD Community Plan and the TOD framework, please visit just type in South Central TOD, and it will take you to the city's TOD website there. My contact information is there as well, but you can reach me via email at Elias, ELIAS.valencia@phoenix.gov. So Victor, what is one takeaway then that you would say to give to members of the community if they wanted to get involved? What can help them to overcome that initial hurdle? Because, you were saying SIMPA and all these other terms, and to some people, that's very intimidating. What would you say is a good piece of advice for anybody working or considering being a part of a community plan?
Just to be open. Sometimes we can be influenced by people in the community to not participate in the process because of broken promises or because of the way a city has handled its business in the past. we have to understand that we are the city. And so when we take that ownership and understand that ownership, it really does change things. And so even though we may not physically own some of this stuff, or land or processes, that experience that you will gain from being involved will pay dividends that you probably won't even know you'll need, a decade from now. But yeah, getting involved, learning and understanding, even when you're not victorious, all of it will come to maturity at the proper time. So just get involved in your neighborhood, get involved in your community, get involved in your cities, and make it the best that you can make it. Because ultimately it's yours, it's mine. This is our country, this is our city, and we have to do what we can to make it the best place possible to live in.
Thanks, Victor, and
thank you.
And I just wanted to add, so you on the community front there gave some good advice for all you government officials, planners, all of those involved in leading or being part of those community plan efforts as well. In order to build trust, you have to have trust as well. So trust that the community knows what they want, trust that the community can give you sound advice. They are the local experts. After all, it is their neighborhood. And if you want to reduce displacement and negative effects of gentrification, then you need to listen to those voices. Victor, again, thanks for your time and being here.
Sage advice, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elias.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/TheOverheadWire. You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at TheOverheadWire.com. And you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it at its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.